See, the other thing that's unfortunate is that throughout this pandemic, my father had been trying to draft a formal will with the help of his friend Deborah Bell and Pete O'Connell, and basically outlining his last wishes, which were the same in the handwritten will, that he's leaving the entire estate to me, the house and all the artwork in my name. And because of the pandemic, he wasn't able to meet with a lawyer. He had a compromised immune system, and we weren't even able to get the notary to happen and even do like a remote notary because our printer was broken, out of toner. And when we started to get wind of the bad news in December, that he may not have much longer to live because the blood transfusions didn't seem to be working anymore because of his damaged DNA in his bone marrow. He unfortunately he's left me with a handwritten will, and the handwritten will, along with the video testimony with his best friend as a witness and whoever else was in the hospital at the time, is basically the will that now needs to go to the surrogate court. And Andreas, I had explained this to him, and he said, "Yeah, I'll sign the waiver because there's a lot of I don't know how else to say this." There's a lot of greed and hate in Andreas, and he wants to try to say that the videos showing that my dad is leaving the house with me were coerced, and he wants to say that the will is not valid. And it's sad because now it's up to a judge to make the determination who doesn't know all the facts and the real situation surrounding this case, and has to go by what's being presented to him. And everybody knows that my dad's last will and intentions were to leave the house in my name and all the artwork and everything else in it, because I was in the best position to do so, and he was estranged from Andreas, and Andreas didn't want any part of it, and he wrote that in the will. He said Andreas and I had a discussion that he wanted no responsibility, no part of One Rescue Street, and that it was up to Oliver Baffy, his own discretion, to help Andreas with proceeds and profits of any sales of the artwork. And now Andreas, unfortunately, instead of signing the waiver, which basically relinquishes his right as an executor and right to the estate in the absence of some kind of formal will, it's criminal, and it's a sin in and of itself on the part of my brother to not cooperate. And it's terribly sad because everybody knows that that's a valid will. I mean, it's handwritten in the state of California. That would be valid. And during the pandemic, and you have to take in consideration, my dad's a cancer patient. He's been very sick, in and out of the hospitals. I'm overwhelmed taking care of him, and death just came up really, really quickly and suddenly, to the point where now I'm left with a handwritten will, notes and videos that state clearly my dad's wishes. And it would just be an awful injustice if the judge didn't recognize this and went into probate and said, okay, 50% for you, 50% for Andreas, because that's not what my dad wanted, and that's just not right. There's no need to sell this house. It can be rented out, and it's an art gallery and a work of art itself. And Andreas is so greedy that the first thing he'd probably want to do is go ahead and say, well, it's half my house, I'm going to sell it. And only get a little tiny bit of money because the house is already mortgaged, and then be stuck with a whole bunch of artwork that would have to be appraised and unfortunately undervalued, because he wouldn't have been allowing me the time to properly market it and sell it. So that would be a huge loss, and it would really be a bad look for the judge if the judge didn't accept the will as valid and accept the video testimony as valid. That would be a gross injustice and very unfair. Um, you know, there comes a time that you don't have to be a stickler for the rules to the point where it's not allowing for things like a pandemic and a cancer patient who is isolated and who can prove. I mean, there's emails to prove that Deborah Bell was sending over to him formally wills in an email for him to print out and fill out, because we all knew that those are the kind of formal things to do. But again, we're not lawyers, and we actually thought that, okay, if we write this out and he signs it, it's going to be okay. So this is an unfortunate thing. It's causing a lot of anxiety and stress, because basically I need to do the deed transfer of the house to my name. Andreas is a convicted felon, so it's very unlikely that he could actually have the deed transferred, but he also needs to sign a waiver acknowledging me as the administrator of the estate, and those were my dad's wishes. And this simple waiver making the administrator of the estate basically transfers ownership of all the property in the house to me. And I'm not going to be a dick, like I had mentioned so many times. I'm going to help my brother, but I cannot allow him to help himself anymore to that which is not his, and that's which my dad didn't want him to have. And specifically, we're talking about the artwork, the house, and whatever property is in here. Okay, so it's sad because Andreas already, in haste, took cameras and sold them, and proceeded to try to get me thrown out of here, and threatened my wife to the point where she had to get an order of protection, and so did I. So sadly now we're faced with having to go to court with a handwritten will, having petitioned the court to make me the administrator, and there's video testimony where you can see my father clearly stating that he's leaving the house to Ali and everything else in it, and it's what he's written on the paper. So it's just terrifying to think that a judge could deny that and say, oh, no, that's not valid, 50 to your brother, 50 to you. And that's definitely not what my dad wanted. And all his friends know this. Everybody knows this. So it's just really a sad situation. And I want to make everybody aware of this. This is what's been upsetting me, grieving and then having to deal with a brother who's mentally ill. And unfortunately, I don't want to say lack of planning or poor planning on the part of my father. But I thought that my dad was going to make it, much longer, and that, we were be able to get some toner and some printer and a lawyer over here at some point when the pandemic was over. But, again, there has to be some type of exception, just like when a soldier's on the battlefield, that a handwritten will is valid. And, there are witnesses to testify to the fact that these are indeed my dad's wishes. That is indeed my dad's handwriting. None of that was coerced or forced. And my wife and I saw him write it right in front of our eyes. So, again, it's upsetting that, if my brother chooses to not sign the waiver, making me the administrator of the estate, and tries to fight it and says, oh no, half of everything is mine, that would be a real shame, and it would drag things through court, much longer. And, quite frankly, it's not his legal residence. He hasn't been living here. He was evicted for the second time over 5 years ago. My dad didn't want him in the house. My dad didn't want him near the artwork. My dad didn't want him fouling up the studio any more than he has. He wanted me to continue honoring his legacy and selling his artwork as best as possible, as best as I saw fit. And that involves removing Andreas's stuff, or better yet, having Andreas remove all his crap that he just freeloaded into the studio with a sheriff's escort at a convenient time, so it can be appraised and sold accordingly. And the same goes for the house. There's one bathroom here, and there's my wife and I paying all the bills, paying on the mortgage. We don't need to let him start freeloading here and being disrespectful to us like he was to my dad. There's no benefit to that. He can just as easily get an apartment somewhere with his own bathroom. But for Andreas to somehow tell the police and the judge that handwritten will on my dad left is invalid is a sin, and it is criminal in and of itself. And it would be a gross injustice if for some reason the courts decide that no, half goes to your brother, half goes to me, because Andreas is incapable of managing this house and this estate. That's definitely not what my dad wanted to do, and that would jeopardize the entire situation here. And everybody knows this. Everybody knows that handwritten will that my dad wrote are his wishes, are his last wishes, and it's what is in the best interest of Andreas. Okay, if he's to realize anything, and I'm to realize the profits from sales of the artwork, it's going to happen sooner. The sooner that he signs the waiver and that I'm made the administrator and executor of this estate, and can get his stuff removed with a sheriff's escort, the sooner that happens, the sooner I can have the paintings appraised and have the artwork sold and have collectors and art galleries and dealers actually view the work the way it's supposed to be in the studio, and resume taking care of this house and everything that's involved in it, and making the mortgage payments without having a mentally ill sibling disrupt everything and threaten us and not respect the fact that we're working, and he's constantly getting arrested, constantly having the police over here and involve his life. I don't need that shit. Neither does my wife. He doesn't need to stay here. He's not being shut out in the cold. My dad didn't want him here. My dad didn't want to leave him the house. That is a valid will, and it's just it would be such a gross injustice if the judge does not recognize that there was a pandemic. He was an artist. He wasn't a businessman, my dad. He left a handwritten will because that's the best that he could do while he was sick with cancer. There's a pandemic. It didn't have the toner and the printer. I mean, you could see we ordered toner. We ordered printer paper. And, there's the history of email correspondence going back and forth between Deborah Bell of her sending him an actual formal will, and the printer, see all the toner right there, didn't want to take the toner, so we tried different printers and we were trying to print that out, and it wasn't working, and the priority really shifted to, okay, well, we have to go back and forth to the hospital so he doesn't die. He was very sick, and so it just upsets me how there's certain attitudes in the legal system that are like so rigid, and not to make exceptions to certain things. So it is deeply upsetting to me that there's any remote possibility that this will wouldn't be accepted as valid. Those are my dad's last wishes, and the same with the video of my dad saying, "I'm gonna leave the house to Ollie with Pete in it." He mentioned that several times, that was the best plan, and that's what he's doing. And it's not to spite Andreas or hurt Andreas. The house is already mortgaged to the max. Andreas is incapable of making enough money and being responsible enough, and didn't want that responsibility. And my dad knew that that's just not going to work out. And Andreas wants to go to Miami anyway, and he's going to have a little bit of insurance money to get himself an apartment and fix his car and have a life. So any resistance that Andreas is doing as far as refusing to sign the waiver and forcing it to go into probate is just sick, and it's just indicative of his mental illness and his cruelty towards his father and I. My father and I had no intention of leaving this house and the artwork to Andreas, just like Andreas had no intention of helping my father sell any of the artwork. He never did. Never even helped take care of my dad, let alone say goodbye to him in the hospital. So I just it's as if grieving from my father has been interrupted by these kinds of things. And folks can blame my dad for not being responsible with money and for squandering his money paying my brother's legal fees and bailing Andreas out of jail. And they can blame my father for not printing out a more formal will and having a lawyer come over here, but he was just trying to survive, and he was just trying to make it through to the next day in a lot of pain. And he wrote that will out because he knew that he needed to have a will, and that the printing it out wasn't quite working with the toner and the paper, and not having the time to even really keep thinking about the fact that he was dying or that he was going to die. That was a painful thing in and of itself for a cancer patient to have to think about, leaving a will and all that. And especially because he had no desire to die. Even though he was in a lot of pain, he never gave up. He didn't want to die, and he died very disappointed that he couldn't finish continuing making his art, and that my brother's crap was still in the studio in front of his paintings, and it was interfering with him creating paintings and showing them. And we wanted to pull each painting off the wall, my father and I, and make a video of him talking about each painting and put it on YouTube. And because my brother's crap was in there, he couldn't do that. Folks, everyone who's watching this video, I just want you to know that will is valid. That's my dad's real wishes, to leave the entire house, the estate, and all the property to me. I'm in the best position to honor his legacy, and to sell his artwork, and to make it profitable to the point where I can give a large portion of the profits to Andres from the sales of the artwork. But to be forced to sell the house because my brother is so greedy and he wants the tiny bit of money that it could be sold for. I mean, the house is already mortgaged to the max. There would be very little profit left over to begin with, and to have my brother somehow, even after my dad has died, to spite me and to continually be angry towards my father by refusing to acknowledge that will is valid and sign the waiver is just it's so troubling, and it's so sick, and I just hope that the judge really understands that there was a pandemic and my dad was suffering from cancer, and that he just didn't have the time to facilitate printing it out and getting the paper and the toner squared away and getting a lawyer and everything and a notary. So he wrote it out and made a video, and he made the best possible effort he could to ensure that everything was going to be left to me, the most responsible one and the one who deserves it. Okay, and this is our house. I've built most of the things here, and so did my dad. The cabinetry, the shelves, the studio. This is my home, and I hope someday, years from now, when Andreas gets the help he needs, he can come and visit me and understand that this was our childhood home also, and that I still love him, but I cannot welcome him in the house now. He's not responsible for paying anything here, never was, and probably never will be. But I don't want to ever make it so that he could never come back and visit me. He just needs to understand it's a tiny house. It's got one bathroom, and that I'm going to be the one to save the house. I don't want to sell it. I promised my dad I wouldn't sell it. It's on a great piece of land. It's a beautiful place. If anything, I could build my brother a tiny house in the backyard or something. But he doesn't want to live here. He doesn't want to be here. And he's told us that time and time again. So my brother, again, has no right here, no right to the house. And this is not what my dad wanted. My dad had him evicted the second time over 5 years ago. He hasn't been living here. It's not his legal residence. And I sincerely hope that the courts, the judge, the legal system recognizes the fact that this handwritten will of my father, along with the video testimony and the witnesses involved, all can testify to the validity of it and the facts that my dad wanted me to have the house, left all the artwork in my name and the entire estate in my name. Okay? And I just sincerely hope that we're all on the same page here, okay? And that there's no ill will towards me and there's no kind of spite or bias or prejudice here. Nobody is perfect, and artists are not the greatest business people, and nor did my dad really fully understand that the handwritten will could be problematic. He signed it and dated it and wrote it out pretty clear and made a video, but was also really trying to print it out, and we had no toner and it was a pandemic. So again, this is now another documentary of why I've been filled with grief, anxiety, and pain over the lack of cooperation and empathy on the part of my brother, and how overwhelming it was to be the primary caregiver for my father, and now be faced with this type of uncertainty and this type of I don't know how just to explain it. I mean, for me, it's cut and dry. That's a valid will. That's what's going on, and my brother is sick and he's ill, and he has no idea how much pain he's caused my father and I, how much difficulty he caused, and how stupid and irresponsible it would be for him to somehow convince a judge that that's not valid, or that he's not going to sign the waiver and acknowledge the validity of my dad's last wishes in both the video and the will. That would be a sin, to not respect my father's last wishes. Again, this is what's going on in my life right now. And I thank you for your support.